Friends, welcome to the Get Ready webinar for our newly scripted worship series called A Wonderful Life. And yes, you got it right. You're reminiscing about this movie called It's a Wonderful Life. And indeed, that does come into it. And also a wonderful book that I was introduced to recently. It's a new book called Integrating Money and Meaning. And so this was a very strong inspiration for me in writing this series. I had wanted to do a series about money, about stewardship. Churches are asking me for that all the time. And so it was really important for me to find the right resource that I felt really looked at money and stewardship and, addressed it in a way that maybe isn't your usual way of coming at it. And so this book, Integrating Money and Meaning, really inspired me because of its connection to money practices as spiritual practice. And I think oftentimes we do stewardship series, or we ask once a year, we ask people for money, let's make the budget. And we do the ask, whether we're comfortable with it or not. But we don't necessarily talk about the role of money in our spiritual lives. We may be talking about the obligation, the connection between the money and making the world a better place. But in terms of our ongoing life around money, this book I felt really helped us to take a deeper look at that. And so you may be using this in conjunction with a stewardship campaign, or you may just be using it any time in the year. We think that it works any time in the year, especially because we're not just talking about the ask, right? We are talking about our relationship with money and how it affects our very spirits, our very lives, day in and day out. And I am so thrilled that those who worked on that book are here with us to spend a little bit of time with us here early in this webinar. And then we're going to get, after we talk a little bit about that, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts of the downloads and what's in there and how to put this series together. But I wanted to start with introducing you so you have a face with a name as you read the book, as you prepare, as your folks use it as a study. Have faces with names. So Maggie Kulik is, this is your story, this is your philosophy, this is the way that you approach your business, which has to do with financial advising. And so we're very grateful that you're here on with us. We're grateful that you wrote the book, but you also wrote it with Liz McGahee, who helped you put that in book form. And Liz did a wonderful work in helping us put together an actual 3-session small group study based on the book and the worship series for use by small groups during the worship series. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
So Maggie, I want to start with you. I had the great privilege of being at the book launch. I'm putting a picture up on the screen right now for folks. That is a picture of when we were together and the book launch there in Atlanta, where your business is based. And I was so struck with the people who came to the book launch, many of them your clients, and you held a conversation with them. And I could tell from their questions and from the conversation that they really, you're not just a financial advisor, you are very much a financial advisor, but this whole philosophy of the way of living with your money spiritually is imbued in everything that you do. Could you tell us a little bit about how you came to that?
Sure. So I came into the financial planning and asset management in a fairly indirect way. I grew up in a family business. I left that business because I felt called, really, for lack of a better word, really, to study theology. And so went to divinity school in the early 90s at the Candler School of Theology at Emory University. And just really, really loved that experience. Didn't have an obvious path to ordination, stayed on the path of sort of academics, and thought what I was going to do was grow up to be a professor of early Christian history, actually. Conditions conspired to make that not a viable solution for me and my family. that's a longer story, but suffice it to say, I found myself at a kind of, I hit a wall in terms of my career path. I finished my PhD without writing the dissertation. I finished all but dissertation, and I was really at an impasse because I knew I couldn't take an academic position and leave Atlanta. And I had always had a very conflicted relationship with money personally, very, very conflicted. Wasn't comfortable with it, had a lot of, for me, the idea of my spirituality and my money life were just really at odds with one another, quite separated, and had been most of my life. And I had kind of, I had an experience really in prayer. I mean, I think I'm talking to people of faith, so I don't think it's, I can actually just say that out loud. Kind of nuance that. I mean, it's true. I had prayer, and the experience was this moment of like, get up and deal with your money voice in my head. And I was just like, what? Like, I didn't get money. I mean, it was really an astonishing moment. And what came to me in that moment and following was my own dis-ease with my financial life, my own confusion spiritually, but also even intellectually. And so I started learning more and getting involved more, and realized that if I was feeling this way, I was probably not the only person on the planet feeling this way.
Right.
I suddenly conceived of this concept of, in a sense, doing pastoral care with money. And
Exactly.
Right. And so that's what got me started on the path to financial planning 17 years ago last month. And then very early on, because of my connections with, I had so many friends in the ministry and in religion and spirituality, I started getting asked to do workshops at churches around this. And so a lot of this book arose as a consequence of being asked to do something, and downstream asked to do something at Candler, actually, in a program that they were working with, where it, just the basic concept that working with your money, engaging your money, talking out loud about it, working through your anxieties and the various issues that arise, was in fact a spiritual practice.
So to me, like, in retrospect, it's like, duh, of course it's a spiritual practice. I mean, read the Gospels, right? It's spiritual practice. But it's still kind of, it's sort of hidden in plain sight in a way, in terms of how we deal with it. And I think that it's so fraught. Money is so fraught that the sheer act of getting together as human beings in a group and expressing our feelings about it is still a radical act, actually, which is kind of
Absolutely.
when you think about it. But on the other hand, money is so complicated. And it's become increasingly complicated as we get into this sort of, post-industrial, techno, whatever space we are in as Homo sapiens, that it just gets worse and worse all the time. And it gets more and more disconnected in some ways from tangible reality in a weird way, in the way we deal with our money. So obviously I could go on and on. I'll stop there. But that was
Right.
this for my engagement with it. And ultimately with wanting to put this book out there. And let me just take this moment to say, I am thrilled that it's found its home back in the church, because that is just a natural place. That's a natural place for it to live. And I just hope it really, stirs the pot in terms of what I think are really super fruitful conversations.
Well, it certainly stirred the pot for me. And one of the things I love about your story is that, it's not as if you have all the answers, or that you always had the answers. This is partly out of your own struggle with what all of us, I think, probably struggle with to some extent. Some of us are more comfortable than others. Some of us got more skills than others earlier on in life. But suffice it to say, like, just as you said, actually talking to other people about how we feel about our money, that's so taboo in many of our lives. And I think that's one of the radical things about doing this series, is that it is going to invite us on a journey. And I can tell you, those of you who are going to prepare the series, that one of the things that happens to me as I'm writing series is that I have to deal with the very subject matter that I'm writing about, right? And you are going to have to deal with the very subject matter that you're going to preach about, that you're going to sing about, that whatever role you play in worship. I really suggest that you go through, read the material, read the book before you do the series, because then you will have gone through the same very personal experience that Maggie did, that Liz probably did, that I did as I wrote the series, and that your people will as they encounter the material. And so I can personally say that my experience of putting the series together was a deeply meaningful one, not without challenge, right? Because I had to deal around my stuff with money. And that can be challenging. But what I so appreciate is that it comes from compassion. And that's so evident in the book. And to be compassionate about the messages that we grew up with, which is something that the worship series starts with right away, is looking back. Now, Liz, when you put together the small group materials for us, and I'm so grateful, we've fashioned it so that there's 3 sessions. Because we thought it was important to have a first Sunday or first, worship service that sort of introduces, in a worshipful way, the material that then would help people into that first session. And so there are 3 sessions that kind of go within the 4-week structure.
Right.
And so tell us a little bit about, you had to sort of condense a lot down, and I'm so grateful. So this will be very doable. Because there are actual page numbers, read this in preparation so you can have a conversation. But the questions actually will be might be a little bit vulnerable. What's your history? It's your money history. What's your best advice for us as participants and leaders in going through these small group materials?
Well, that's a good question, because there are just a few questions in each of the 3 sections, looking back and looking at how you're doing now and how you want to move forward with your courageous vision. But they are really deep questions, and I think you could go as deep as you'd like to, but you need to be prepared, as you said, that there's going to be some challenge to this, some emotional challenge, because, as we've said, we don't talk about money in our society. And we particularly don't talk about it in our spiritual lives or in church, or whether that's such a taboo subject. So this is going to be new, and we need to be ready to be vulnerable and to be open. And I also have done the practices that are in the book and that are fleshed out in the worship series too. And it's not easy. It's very, very important. But we think we know how we feel about money, but we probably don't. So I guess my advice about that is to be open and be okay that you're going to learn something new about yourself.
And by the way,
Go ahead.
One thing that it's really important to remember that spiritual practice is practice.
Yes.
Right.
So it's not like, oh, you're going to arrive and it's all going to be fine, or that, it's practice, like any other practice. And so patience and compassion with self and others seems like super important.
Yes, and that's really a good point. That's sort of like, these questions are big. You will talk about them in your small groups, but they will be with you as you move on. And that's sort of the purpose of the book. Is not, okay, do these practices and then everything's going to be okay and you're going to make money and you're going to feel good about it. That's not what this book is about. It is a spiritual practice, it's a lifetime journey, like all spiritual practices. This is just a good beginning.
Right, and it is a good beginning. It's a good beginning to help us enter into the conversation in ways we might not have before. And partly the small group materials could be done in small groups. They could also be done as personal reflections. So somebody could go through it on their own. And certainly it's a viable choice, because you may not be at the point where you want to actually talk to other people about it. And so utilizing these small group materials, we've created pages. Part of your downloads, folks, is that there's a leader's guide if you're going to do the small group, but then there's also pages that you could just simply either send in PDF form to your congregation or print them out, or however you disseminate information. But people could actually do this on their own. And that is absolutely a viable, option for folks. The entry point is, there are different ways, but the point is to actually spend some time thinking about this. Go ahead.
About that. So if you do end up, or someone ends up wanting to take this further, there is the book that has practices in it, and we are about to launch a workbook to go with the book that's going to be out probably in a couple of weeks. So if
that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we will let all of you know when that's out. We'll send you a link to where you can get that, because that could be a wonderful accompaniment. And certainly many folks who are watching right now are going to be getting ready later on. They'll be watching the recordings. So, you may, it may already be out. So check on that. Yeah. So one of the entry points that I think is so brilliant in the book, that I think is very, very helpful and helped me begin to have a tool to think about my own attitudes toward money, is this connection to It's a Wonderful Life movie. And, I never really thought about the movie in terms of it's really revolves around a money crisis. Right? And all of the characters, as you say in the book, have different ways of relating to that money crisis. And we can see these almost as archetypes to sort of engage how we also react to money crises. Maggie, would you say just a little bit about these, looking at these as archetypes and how to use those? Of course, they're not to pigeonhole, and you may not just be one, but how do we relate to these characters?
In fact, most people are not actually just one. So stepping back just for a second, why A Wonderful Life? I mean, Wonderful Life does have these fascinating characters, and it's become a somewhat iconic movie, become a Christmas movie, which is fascinating, So it's also two views of the way our capitalist society might go. I could go about an hour and a half on that. I won't. I'll just say that part of what got me into this was this two visions of the nature of how one could relate to money. A generative vision, a la the Bailey building and loan, and then this darker vision that arises sort of as a spiritual experience for George Bailey when he gets the honor and privilege and terror of glimpsing the world had he not been in it, which is really, that in itself is fascinating. So the characters, the idea behind money archetypes in general, and why we kind of connected them to these characters, is that there are sort of energies abroad in the land, internally and externally to us. And sometimes it helps people to sort of, characterize or create, be able to see their own actions internally as a kind of character that arises, which is not the same to say that that's who you are, right?
Right.
So the idea behind these is just to sort of be able to reflect on their attributes and think about, when do those attributes arise in yourself? And to your point, someone can be, I don't know that you want me to go through characterizing these various archetypes, but, to look at, say, you can basically in one moment be an Uncle Billy and very quickly become a Mr. Potter in certain circumstances. And the question is, right, how those energies arise, what those energies mean, what of them are really good and healthy, what of them are not so healthy. And it's just a kind of tool for helping you sort of see your responses in a different light. So I think that the whole concept of these kinds of energies or archetypes is super helpful, and connecting them back to the book made it fun and interesting, very interesting in terms of the story.
Yeah, and the archetypes sort of function kind of like symbols do in worship, which is to take something that's really intangible, like our attitudes about money, and give it a persona, give it something tangible to sort of be able to talk about it.
Right.
Yeah. So, Liz, have you had conversations about these characters with other people that sort of, gave some aha moments in terms of, working with folks around the archetypes?
Yes, I have. I've had people talk to me about being the victim. That's like I didn't realize until I looked at this, and that I had a bit of this victim in me. I thought maybe I was more like the warrior, but when I looked at sort of the characteristics and just explored this and unpacked it a little bit more, I was like, wait a minute. There's some of me in there. Also, some people, sometimes you recognize characteristics about yourself that you might have really disliked or you might really like, and then it just helps you see that there are good and bad sides to all these characteristics. Right. It's sort of good to be the fool sometimes. It's fun. You can do that. But how far do you take it? So, like, I think with a lot of things in our lives, it's the balance. And these characters are obviously pretty one-dimensional because they're movie characters.
Right.
But in real life, we're a mixture of all of them.
Yeah.
It gives us a way to just speak of things that I personally is a little less threatening.
Right.
Liz and I have a running joke about a character a sort of energy inside of her who we named Babs. You can talk about Babs or not, but I have other, so there's a way in which it's a way of talking about things that arise inside of ourselves in this context that kind of takes some of the it gives us a view of it, and it gives us a little objectivity or a little distance that allows us to really examine it a little bit more closely. I think it's a very helpful tool.
Yeah,
but it should not be used with like the thing itself. It's sort of like the Enneagram in that way.
Right.
It's like got to be careful to not so deeply imbue yourself in such a way that it becomes reified. That's the one cautionary aspect of anything like that.
Yeah, and I want to say that while I was writing this series, one of the practices that really helped me, interestingly, because just what you said about getting a little bit more objective view about it, or even curiosity about it, instead of feeling like, oh, I have to do the bills and this is so awful and it's just like my life is awful, like whatever attitude is that's the anxiety about money. One of the things I started was to just wonder, right? So this word wonder, wonderful life became a big deal in the worship series. Because in two ways. One is wonder and awe, of course, at the abundance and the beauty of creation, and to sort of, in times of feeling scarcity, to sort of readjust the lens, to look at with wonder at the world. But also this idea of wondering like curiosity. And I began to, every time I would feel anxious about something around money, I would say, remember to wonder, and I would go, I wonder how that will turn out, or I wonder what creative solution I'll find to that money problem, and even to the extent that I set a timer on my phone at 10 o'clock every morning. In fact, it came on right as we were starting this. 10 o'clock every morning, my phone pops up a notification that says, wonder. And I started that while I was writing this series. And what it makes me do is to say, okay, what are you anxious about right now? And how can you get curious about it? And so that is because of working with this material. And I thank you, because that in itself has really been quite a wonderful spiritual practice for me.
That's great.
Yeah.
For sharing that, Marcia.
Yeah. So before we let you go, I just want to highlight on the screen, I put this quote that we use from the movie that's towards the beginning of the movie. You hear that, it's in outer space, and you hear this voice of God. And God is saying has called Clarence Oddbody, the angel, just what a great name, Clarence the angel, and said, you need to go down and take care of, there's a man down on earth that needs our help. Clarence says, is he sick? And God says, no, worse, he's discouraged. And I think that is just, I get verklempt every time I say that or read that, because I do think that many people are discouraged about money, are discouraged about survival in this world, are discouraged about whether you have it or not, you might be discouraged because you don't, but you might be discouraged because it feels like you can't do anything about the poverty that is in the world. There's just so many different layers. And what your book does, and what now hopefully this worship series will do, will help remind us that we are empowered to do something about that, and that can actually be a practice that's rooted in our faith, rooted in our spirituality, and that we can find something besides discouragement around this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you both so much for being on with us for just this short amount of time. And we're so very grateful, and I'm glad that folks get to meet you and hear about your work, and many blessings on its continuation. And we can't wait for that workbook to come out.
Thank you so much for having us. Great talking to you.
Yeah.
All the best.
All right.
With your
Take care.
participants.
Yeah, thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, friends, wow, great. I can't wait for you to get into the material, because it really has been a blessing to me. And I know it will be a blessing to you. So let's get into a little bit more about the series itself, what you find in the downloads, and some of the features of what you'll be doing with your folks. So we have 4 weeks to this series. Oftentimes our series are longer than that, but this was a 4-week series, fits nicely into a month. And I know that many of you may be considering this for the month of November, which ends on Thanksgiving weekend. It kind of is a natural time when people are talking about stewardship and money, but also ending on Thanksgiving would be a perfect way to end with week 4 looking with gratitude. But again, like I say, this is meant to be a movable feast, so you can do it any time of year. And in fact, there might be some wisdom to doing it at a time of year, perhaps even right before you start a stewardship campaign or any sort of money-raising campaign, whether you're raising money for a specific project or what have you. But dealing with money, because what I want to keep underscoring is that this is not just all about the ask. This is about how we deepen our own spiritual practices around money. And then that will, in fact, I think, help us from a healthier perspective actually think about how it is that we support the church and the work of the church. So there's 4 weeks looking back, looking in, looking out, and looking with gratitude. And so it follows those sentiments from the book. Looking back, of course, it looks at what are the messages that we grew up with, helps us to get a handle on why we might have some of the attitudes that we do. It introduces these characters from the movie. Looking in then is that what they call in the book the courageous vision, and how we want to leave a mark on the world, and aligning that with our desires, our values, our faith. Looking out, of course, is then what are we doing with our money practices that then align that vision that we went inward to find, align that with outward actions. And then looking with gratitude brings it all back around to gratitude as the basis for everything that we do around a wonderful life. So those are the 4 weeks. Now, in the Worship Design Studio, some of you are new to our resources, new to my teaching. I talk about sensory-rich worship, and it's based on the fact that cognitive scientists like Howard Gardner, a cognitive researcher who came up with the multiple intelligences theory, and you're seeing a list of ways that he says that we're intelligent. But basically what he's saying is that we all take in information in different ways. And so what I do in the Worship Design Studio is I teach, and then I also create these series that are based on sensory-rich expression, meaning that different people with different learning styles are going to find ways into the material, because everything about worship is pointing towards that theme, is helping us to enter into that theme. So in the Worship Design Studio, we focus on verbal arts, right, which are all the words. It's even silence. Silence is part of the toolkit, but it's intentional silence, not awkward silence, right? So verbal arts, preaching, liturgy, all of the words that we say. Music arts, everything from how does music set the tone or the mood. You'll see in our scripts that Sometimes we invite people to underscore some words because we know the power of music. It's from my book, Think Like a Filmmaker, but also, to the anthems and the music that we do and the music that we sing together. Visual arts is everything that we see in the space, but also lighting and color and how we're related to each other in the space. Media arts is everything from what we put, the visuals that we put on the paper, the lighting and sound in the room. And if you have projection media, we have ideas for that. And dramatic arts has to do with our ritual actions. And so that can be everything from sacraments to doing special ritual actions that have to do with the theme. So I just wanted to give you that for those of you who are new to the Worship Design Studio. This is really important. That's why you see us giving you suggestions, not for just words and music, but also for visuals and media and ways that you can draw people into conversation in small group and personal reflection. So another thing that we teach in the Worship Design Studio are threads and threshold. And so threads are things that I create that get repeated within the series. And you're going to read a lot more about this in the overview as you take a look at the materials. But threads are the thing that give it a series its continuity. So for instance, we have an original song called A Wonderful Life that you will choose to do or not. Again, want to say that all of my series are adaptable, but this original song will be new the first Sunday, but because it gets repeated every Sunday, by the time you get to week 4, people will know that and that will have become a heart song. So threads are very important, those things that repeat throughout. It gives the series its continuity and it gives some structure and some repetitive nature to that. Threshold is what I call sort of an introit on steroids. It's how do we get into the journey? And so it's very important to me that after the welcome and announcements, that there is a moment when we create this dive into the spiritual journey of the material. I've been to worship services before as just a guest, and we begin worship and we get to the sermon, and then I hear the preacher say, we're in a sermon series about blah, blah, blah. And I think to myself, wow, do I wish I had known that from the very beginning, because that song would have made more sense. And those were, I didn't know we were in a sermon series until we got to the sermon. So that's one reason why I don't call these series sermon series. They're worship series, because everything in the worship is pointing toward that message. All the worship artists are involved in bringing that message alive. But also this threshold moment idea is so that we can, at the very beginning, help people to focus, get a lens, so to speak, on the message, so that then we encounter all of the material, all the songs we sing, all the prayers that we pray, everything that we see in the space that we experience has a context, it has a container, it has a lens. So in this series, what you're going to, as you read through the scripts, you're going to see that our threshold moment is called Illuminating the Shadows, because that's one of the main images that I use in this series, is that we're bringing this conversation about money out of the shadows and into the light, right? And so Illuminating the Shadows is what it's called in the worship guide. And Be Thou My Vision is our theme song for that threshold moment. In fact, it's a theme song where I have divided, we do the first verse in the opening part, right, in the threshold. The second verse comes around the scripture time, and the third verse comes as a doxology. But Be Thou My Vision has some really wonderful imagery that has to do with this message. And so we use that tune, we use those words, and we light a candle, a special candle. This would be different than the candles you normally have perhaps on your table. But it would be a special larger candle that we would light as we do a prayer that helps us to see that we're going to illuminate the shadows of this topic, bring it into the light so that we can have a depth of spirituality and a depth of comfort, also challenge, but a depth of really seeing money not as something that is taboo or scary, but is part of our spiritual path. So some of the other threads, let me just quickly tell you, is that the children, when the children come forward, that is when we sing the Wonderful Life song, which is new for this series. Very simple little refrain that can be sung as a round, and that gets sung as children come forward and as children go back. And each one of these children's time is written to sort of highlight those two aspects of the word wonder and awe, and also I wonder, right? And so it's another way of bringing the children into the conversation in a way that's age appropriate, but that also adds something to the adult's experience as well. So the scripture time has a quote from the movie that I've paired with this particular Sunday, a quote, or sometimes there's a couple of quotes. We sing verse 2 of that, "Be Thou My Vision," and then there's a scripture reading. So that's another thread, and that is the way that we do that scripture time. Always a quote from the movie. Hopefully your folks will have been encouraged to, maybe you've had a movie night at the beginning of the series, so it will just sort of conjure back the memories of that moment. Or they're just remembering it from when they've seen it the last time. But it will help to connect the movie experience and something in that movie and that story, that narrative, with the faith narrative. Prayers, there's another way of creating a repetitive thread, and that is we're suggesting that you invite people to take photographs during the week and send them in whatever way is easy for your congregation. Maybe you have a Facebook page, maybe you have people texting them to somebody or sending them by email, or if you have a congregation that's not tech savvy, maybe they're just bringing some photographs that they found at home, but something that for them they have seen with wonder and awe the abundance of life. And so partly this series is to help retool us for seeing, right, for looking at the abundance around us. And then the song every week to sort of frame that. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. I just want to thank you, Lord. Very, very simple, right? And again, with any of these, you can adapt it, put your own things with it. If you have another thank you song that you would prefer to use, you absolutely are empowered to do that. We give you sort of the container, and we say, we want you to make it absolutely perfect for your congregation. So please adapt where you need to. During offering, we suggest that you have somebody do a testimony to what they wonder, the awe and wonder they have in their life, but also wondering about what sort of a what if, a dreaming, using imagination, right? Here's imagine. Imagination is part of what we have as assets, right? It's not always financial assets that we have to bring, but our imagination about what the church could be in the future. What's the vision what's the courageous vision that we're supporting as a church? So a little bit of what ifing. What if we could pull it together to support this kind of ministry? Oh my gosh, what a difference we could make in the world. So that's something that you could do around the offering time as well. Again, the doxology is verse 3 of the theme song, Be Thou My Vision. It just is amazing how perfectly these 3 verses from that hymn work so well to create kind of this structure in the service. And the benediction is always this quote from the movie dialogue. The Mary and George early in the movie are taking some goodies to some new folks in the neighborhood who happen to be immigrants, and they do a blessing, right? Bread for the house, salt for the house, wine for the house, and they do this blessing. And so we've kind of incorporated it into a benediction that is a blessing for the congregation as they go through. So that's sort of the threads and threshold. And I want to just say to you, I'm so glad we have some folks who are chatting in the chat box, which is awesome. I'm going to go through these, and Jenna's going to collect some questions, and then I will take questions at the end so we make sure that we get all of your questions answered. So I want to suggest in your preparations, and you're getting ready for this series, that the first thing you do is to read through the synopses, quotes, and scriptures, for every Sunday, to familiarize yourself with sort of how we're looking at each one of the Sundays and where that's going, and the scriptural content that you'll be dealing with. And then read the overview of the worship scripts. if you haven't purchased this yet and you're just wondering if you're thinking about doing it, both of these documents are available at that page, which is worshipdesignstudio.com/wonderful-life. And Jenna, if you'll put that in the chat box, and then we'll also have it in the YouTube description if you're watching this via video, a link directly to that. But both of these are available on that page before you purchase it so that you can really see what's in it, and these will give you a really great idea about the content and the structure so that you can see if this is what you'd like to do with your congregation. So highly recommend that you start there first. Familiarize yourself with the basics. The overview is really important for you to understand some of the theory behind the way that I have designed the series. And so that will give you a lot of, it will make sense to you then when you look at the actual scripts. I know that our propensity is to look at the script immediately, what's in the worship. But I want to recommend you read that overview first because it will help make sense of what you're seeing in the scripts. Okay, speaking of scripts, when you download, and let me say that when you download from our download file sharing program, you'll see all the separate, there are many, many documents. You'll see all the separate documents, but my suggestion is to download them all in one fell swoop. There's a down arrow in the upper right-hand corner of the page when you go to that link, and I suggest you just click on that and download everything all at once. What we do is we number our resources, so when it goes into a folder on your computer, it puts them in an order that makes sense, all right? And so what you're going to find in there is two versions of every script. One is a PDF version, so that you have a concrete copy of all the suggestions that we're making. Because the Word version is probably what you're going to use to pare it down, to decide, to make your own decisions, move things around. And if you start to move things around and then you're like, oh, what happened to that section? I don't know where that is. You can have the PDF version to go back and look at. So we give you two versions, one that's unchangeable and one that's changeable. So those are in there for you for every one of the services. What's also there is a separate communion prayer. So because I don't know when you all will be doing this series, and sometimes you may be in churches that do communion once a month, and that may fall on a different Sunday. I didn't put communion inside the scripts, the weekly scripts, but I created a separate document, and you can insert that into whatever week or all the weeks if you do weekly communion. Now, let me just say that I use a very ecumenical form of the prayer in terms of the sections, and some of you are in traditions that don't use that form, so I want you to adapt. Use some of the wording that I used, pull out what you need, switch things around, whatever you need to do to format it for your tradition. I'm not asking you to change your tradition. I'm just giving you something that is in a format that is ecumenically very common, but also understanding that you may use a different form. And if you do weekly communion, you might take that form and you might tweak the language here and there, which I think is a really fun, your verbal artists, your wordsmiths will love doing this, drawing in some of the specific themes to that week. So you could adapt my wording. One of the things that I try to do as I write communion prayers specifically for series is to draw in some of that imagery and metaphors having to do with the message. So for instance, you can see here I wrote, "Holy are you and blessed is your Son, Jesus Christ. He offered the Spirit's economy that defied human systems, preaching good news to the poor, proclaiming release to the captives," right? So getting at that sort of radical nature of Jesus' message in his time was also sort of looking for alternative economies of spirit, right? How do we treat one another? How are we in right relationship? The equal distribution of goods, that kind of thing. One thing to note about the communion prayer is that I have used the tune, Be Thou My Vision, for some of the parts in the prayer, and you'll want to sing those through on your own to figure out where the syllables land, all right? Holy of holies of power and might, so full of glory, your word and your light, blessed, blessed, You see what I'm saying? You need to do this on your own so you can figure it out. I can't even remember. I'd have to sit here and think about it. So that was my demonstration to tell you, think about it before you do it on Sunday, because you don't want everybody in the congregation trying to figure it out. So if you have a strong song leader or the choir knows where those syllables land with the melody, it will work. And again, if you can make it work better, change the words. All right? Okay. So it's just kind of a fun way to get that theme song back in there, that Be Thou My Vision tune in there for some more. All right, so Children's Time of Wonder scripts, they're all scripted out. They're separate from the scripts themselves. So whoever is going to be doing those, have them look at those. And there's some things that you'll need to prepare for. Like the first Sunday, I have a glass, and you pour water in the glass, and you just keep pouring and pouring and pouring until it spills out. So you'll want it sitting in some sort of container that can catch the water. So please read through those before Saturday night, before Sunday, right? Read through those now as you're getting ready so that you know exactly what to do. Again, adapt as you need to. They all end with a little back and forth repeating prayer, so the kids can be part of that prayer. So again, about wonder and wonder, Children's Time of Wonder. Those are separate scripts. Now, sermon helps. In this series, I have done more extensive writing of sermon helps than in any of my other series. I usually try to do some of my thoughts around, how, because I do a lot of exegesis as I'm writing the worship, right? So I've done that exegesis and thinking about it before I've written the script. So I try to give you some of that thought process. But in this one, I did a lot more of the thought process, including some of my own journey around these money issues. And part of that is because I want to model for you. I am offering you some vulnerability about my own journey in this. But I'm also doing it in a way that I think you could do it without exposing too much. As a preacher, it's a very fine line about what you share, what you don't share, how vulnerable you get with folks. But the truth is that if we don't get real or vulnerable with the fact that I'm on this journey too, we all grew up with weird things about money, and it colors our entire life and the way that we deal with money. And so without getting too personal in it, you can offer this idea that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to share. It's okay to admit I don't have it all together. And in fact, I do live in the shadows of this money issue a lot because I'm afraid to talk about it. I'm afraid to think about it sometimes, right? I'm afraid to look at my ledger sometimes, right? So the sermon notes, I hope that what you will do, preachers, or even those who are not preachers, because it will really get you into the subject, is to actually read through those pages. It's quite a lot, but I think that it will help you really get to a point where you see why I paired the scriptures that I paired with the particular weeks and with the material from Maggie's book. I think it's really important that that the scriptures be that foundation, but it's also helpful to have these other things that we're bouncing off of and we're saying, look at this in light of these scriptures. So my suggestion to you would be to dive in and just read through my sermon help pages, sermon fodder, and it will really jumpstart you. Okay, so also in your downloads are the Wonderful Life song. Again, super, super simple, arranged by my friend Jason Shelton. I do this crazy thing where I get a little ditty in my head and I sing it into my phone, and I send that to one of my composer friends, and they go, "Oh, here it is," and that's what he did. And so it's a fun little song. It is meant to be for all ages to be able to sing it, but you could also do it in a round. And so we've got both the music for the pianist with guitar chords, and we also have that in a form you can see there that's small that you can put in your worship guide for people. All right, now a couple of things that I have in this series that I haven't done in other series. So those of you who have done some of my other fully scripted series, this will be new, but I wanted to give you an example of what a pared down script would look like. So when I give you the scripts you're going to look at, have all of our suggestions. So in every music slot, I have both sort of choices for classic or traditional worship out of hymnals, but I also have suggestions that if you're in a more contemporary or alternative setting, here's a song that we would suggest. So all of those suggestions are in there. And what you're meant to do is take that word version and then strip it down to your choices only, right? And if you decide you're not going to do, let's say, the testimonial in the offering time, then you would just take out all that language based on the testimonial stuff. So I gave you an example in the downloads of what a pared down script would look like for local church use, so that you see what I'm expecting that you will do with these scripts, so that they're more pared down, less confusing, and they're really helpful for you to use with leaders actually in the services. Now, these are not for the congregation. What I've done then as well is I've given you an example of what a worship guide, that's what I call a bulletin, a worship guide would look like once you've stripped it of all of the red rubrics that I have in there describing the action and everything. And so this can help you see what that might look like. Now, I love, when I create worship guides, I like to use 11 by 17 folded. It gives me much more space so that I can do like a watermark picture in the background like you see here. I like to have space. So, of course, reformat any of these scripts into your worship guides in whatever way is helpful for you. But I just wanted to give you this example of what that would look like, so you get an idea of what words you would put in and what words you would not put in. Because there's a lot of leader words that I give you in these scripts that I don't intend for you to put in the bulletin, right? And if you have someone who doesn't hear so well, and maybe your hearing system is not so great in your sanctuary, that would benefit from a full script, you could give them a leader script and they could see all of the words that the leaders are going to say, and that might be helpful. But in general, those leader scripts are not meant for the entire congregation. We don't want them following the bouncing ball and reading all of the words to everything, right? Okay, so that's just an example for you. All right, so then we have our visual and media arts ideas for this series that Jenna has put together for us. There's that candle idea of the beginning, having a special candle that symbolizes illuminating the shadows. We also have something called an anchor image, and this is a main metaphor. And so silhouettes, pictures of people in silhouette, are something that we have been using in a lot of our materials that you could also use. And there are a lot of pictures, and Jenna has listed, we've made albums for this series in many of these royalty-free photo sites. And so you can get lots of pictures for your screens if you use projection media, or for worship guide bulletin covers, that kind of thing. But you can also, Jenna suggests in here, you could also take pictures, do a photo shoot of people in your congregation, or this might be a great youth project that they go out on sunset at some point and take silhouette pictures for use on the screens. That just makes it a little bit more personal. It incorporates them in a fun way and helps them see themselves as contributors to the worship experience. So there's a page about the congregational photos, about seeing abundant life, the wonders of abundant life out there that we suggest in the scripts, and a little bit more about holding a church movie night so that you all can watch It's a Wonderful Life together. Interesting tidbit we found out about It's a Wonderful Life is that one of the reasons why it became so popular is because for maybe a couple of decades even, the copyright went out of use, and so TV stations could use it for free, and so that's why it was on so much, and therefore it became a classic. Interesting little tidbit. All right, so finally, last thing that's in your downloads is a bonus. I did recently an interview with Mika Vandersal, who is she is a seminary trained pastor who has a business now that's called Vandersal Collective that helps churches with fundraising, whether that's a capital campaign, fundraising, stewardship campaigns, whatever it is. That's her business now. And we had a spectacular interview. I love it. And there's a link to it in this download. But what she has also created for us is a one-pager that your finance team, whether you call that a finance committee or trustees or whatever it is, and maybe that's a combined time you would have together, but she created a worksheet of questions that would have to do not necessarily with our individual. That's what the small group with the Integrating Money and Meaning book does. It's more about our individual spiritual journeys. But what Mika is giving us is a way for our finance teams to ask questions about the culture, the money culture of the church, the history of the church. And it's really a wonderful interview, really worth your finance teams watching that interview and then working on some questions together as part of this whole spiritual practice. So friends, those are the things that you have in your downloads. I hope this has been helpful. I'm going to have Jenna come on and tell me if we have some questions or some comments or some ideas that have come across that we should talk about here at the end.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions that came through, some good ones. Kelly asked if we will have a way to share photos of the series as people are kind of putting the series on their church. I said we will have a Facebook album to collect photo submissions that people send us, but wondering if we should come up with a hashtag as well.
Oh, I think that's an excellent idea. Yeah, so the Worship Design Studio Facebook page has photo albums, and whenever people send us pictures, whether that comes over on my personal Facebook page or the Worship Design Studio Facebook page or through emails, however they come, what we do is we put them in the album. And so you can keep going back to Worship Design Studio Facebook page, look in our photos, open up the album. You can see what's going on with people adding photos and that kind of thing. So a hashtag would be an awesome way to do it. So let's make one up, Jenna. What do you suggest?
Kelly actually suggested hashtag wonderful life with 3 L's because probably not many people are going to use that.
Right?
Yeah.
So wonderful with the 2 L's on the end of that to make it FULL and then LIFE. So that means 3 L's in there. So hashtag wonderful life. Okay, you're on. That's it. Way to go, Kelly. Thank you so much.
Another question we got, Sid asked, how do we help the congregation members feel engaged if they have not seen the movie? I don't want each sermon to require a rehashing of the movie and characters. And in the materials, we suggest having a movie night at the church.
Right.
So Debbie also suggested possibly placing a Cliff Notes section in the bulletin for each week to help visitors who may not have attended the movie night.
Right. That's a great idea. In the sermon notes, sermon fodder, there is a link to a really, really good, it's not a synopsis because it's longer than a synopsis, but it tells the story of the movie. So I would highly recommend going and looking at that, and that might be an interesting Cliff Notes way to make the Cliff Notes. Also, I think that while you're going to be referencing the movie in your sermons, I don't know that you'll be, I think you'll be able to do it in a way that doesn't require people knowing the scene or showing the scene to talk about it. And you might also, in the small group document, we have a link to 2 places where you can, I think Amazon and somewhere else, where individuals could watch the movie. So it may be that, say, a visitor comes and you're talking about the movie in a way that doesn't require them to have watched it, but it might pique their interest to go home and watch the movie. And so you might have, say, a couple of links or just tell people, search for in Amazon, you can rent it for $2.99 or whatever, and invite people to go watch it as well.
All right, a couple other questions. Jean says, I'm not clear on the use of the anchor image of the shadow, the silhouette. My pastor suggested using the picture of the Wonderful Life advertisement that will make reference each week to A Wonderful Life. So wondering about suggestions about how to use that, what the connection is. Yeah.
So you could use them if you have projection media, so as backgrounds for song slides or that kind of thing. If you don't use projection media, then instead of having just the logo that we gave you, you could actually use a different silhouette image on the front of your worship guide every week. And that way it could feel like that logo, but it gives some visual interest and change every week. So those would be a couple of ways to use that anchor image. Really, the tangible anchor image that you will use in the space visually will be this illuminating, lighting the candle, that special candle about illuminating the shadows and coming out of the shadows into the light and talking about money. So that's going to be more the visual, tangible kind of thing that you do in the space. Very simple this time. You know, some of our series we have very intricate ways of doing lots of visuals. But this is more simple. And so those silhouettes really are more about how print media or projection media. Hope that helps.
All right, 2 more questions.
Okay.
Verge says, where is the interview Marcia mentioned near the end of the webinar? I think that must be the interview with Mika.
Right. So the interview with Mika is a link inside the document. So when you download all the documents, one of the documents is what you're looking at the screen on the screen right now, actually. And when you download that, in that is a link. It says in our interview here, when you click that link, it's going to open up a YouTube video for you. And so that's how you get to it, through that document.
All right, and one last question. How long do you think it takes to prep and prepare for this series? I was hoping to start mid-September and run through mid-October. Am I rushing things?
That's a really good question. And I think that because there's not a whole lot of tangible things to get ready, like our new Advent series that just launched, that's based on the 300th anniversary of Joy to the World. It's called Heaven and Nature Sing. And we're encouraging you to have evergreens exploding and, all these different things that take more time to create. But this series doesn't. So really this is more about, I would give yourself some immersive time to read through the synopses and scriptures, the sermon, the overview of the worship, and the sermon fodder. Do that really soon, so that you can discern, is this something that we can jump right into? So I really think it's only about, you can order books and Amazon will get you books right away if you want to do the small group study. The small group study is completely all written out. You can just print off the leader sheets. If you don't do small group things, you can just give people the personal sheets to do. So actually, I think this is one of those series where you could probably jump right in, but I would do it soon.
All right, I think that wraps up the questions that we had.
Wonderful. I'm so grateful for those of you who came on live, and for those of you who are watching the recording. Thank you so much. I am always just so grateful for those of you who are out there and bringing the Word of God to people week after week after week. And if I can be part of your ministry in that, if I can support you in that, then I am so gratified. And I hope that this series will be one that helps really get to the health of your congregation. I think it's such a seminal subject, and it's something that we all have to think about every day we deal with our money. Every day, whether we have enough, whether we don't have enough. We do have a disclaimer on this series that says if you're in a congregation that has a lot of money insecurity, in other words, really struggling to just make ends meet, you might want to take a look at this series and consider what adaptations you might make, or consider whether it's the right one for your congregation. Because, as we deal with our money and our attitudes about money, that changes depending on how secure we are. And so this really is a series where we're assuming to some extent that we're talking on a level about how we decide how we will support others with our money. how we will support the church with our money, but not just our money, our assets. And so it may be that if you're in a congregation that has a mixture of people who are secure or insecure in terms of money, that you may want to really bring to the fore some of the things that I say in the sermon fodder, but also in the series about other assets. It's not all about money. We have many assets, right? We have time, we have energy, we have passion, we have encouragement, we have enthusiasm. You know, there are some people who can't afford to give very much money to the church, but their enthusiasm and support of leadership, we could not live without, right? That is as important as the air we breathe and the money that keeps our churches open, is that support and encouragement we get from people. So it may be that as you adapt, depending on your context, that you may need to really bring out what are all the assets that we have that we can offer to the community. All right, friends, thank you so much for being with me on this. I hope this has been helpful. And again, always email us, Marcia@marciamcfee.com, if you have further questions or need help in any way. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.